Good evening, everybody. This is Rinpoche again, and this is Spiritual Story Time. We're beginning a new book today, and I hope you had a lovely day. I made waffles, and I ate so many waffles that I feel sorry, but they were delicious. Savory waffles. You'll have to try them sometime. Maybe I'll put my recipe online. Mustard and all kinds of good stuff. Anyway, hope your day was lovely and that you're remaining peaceful. Our first story, this is our book today. We're going to be reading this for a while, actually. This is Tibetan Folk Tales, and this is written by Frederick and Audrey Hyde Chambers, which of course they didn't invent Tibetan Folk Tales, but they probably translated it. Yeah, but anyway, it's a nice group of stories, and I'd like to begin with, there's no pictures, so this is like for big people, but little people can listen, nothing harmful. This first story is called The Creation. In the beginning was voidness, a vast emptiness without cause, without end. From this great voidness there arose gentle stirrings of wind, which after countless eons grew thicker and heavier, forming the mighty double thunderbolt scepter Dorje Gyantram. Dorje Gyantram created the clouds, which in turn created the rain. The rain fell for many years until the primeval ocean Gyatso was formed. Then all was calm, quiet, and peaceful. The ocean became as clear as a mirror. Slowly the winds began to breathe once more, gently moving over the waters of the ocean, churning them continually until a light foam appeared on the surface. Just as cream is churned into butter, so were the waters of Gyatso churned into earth by the rhythmic motion of the winds. The earth rose like a mountain, and around its peaks murmured the winds, ever moving, tireless, forming cloud upon cloud from which fell more rain, only this time heavier and full of salt, giving birth to the great oceans of the universe. The center of the universe is Rirap Lumpo, Sumeru, the great four-sided mountain made of precious stones and full of beautiful things. There are rivers and streams on Rirap Lumpo, and many kinds of trees, fruits, and plants. For Rirap Lumpo is special. It is the abode of the gods and the demigods. Around Rirap Lumpo is a great lake, and encircling the lake, a ring of golden mountains. Beyond the ring of golden mountains is another lake, it too encircled by mountains of gold, and so on. 7 lakes, 7 rings of golden mountains. And outside the last ring of mountains is the lake Chigyatso. It is in Chigyatso where that the 4 worlds are found, each like an island, with its own particular shape and distinct inhabitants. The world of the east is Hlupak and is shaped like the half moon. People of Hlupak live for 500 years, and they are peaceful. There is no fighting in Hlupak. The people have bodies like giants and faces shaped like the half moon. They are not as fortunate as us, for they have no religion to follow. The Western world is called Balang Chu and is like the sun in shape. As in Hlupak, the people are large and live for 500 years, but they have faces shaped like the sun and they keep many kinds of cattle. The land of the north is square in shape and is called Draminyen. People of Draminyen have square faces, and they live for 1,000 years or more. In Draminyen, food and riches are abundant. Everything a man needs in his 1,000-year lifetime comes to him without effort or suffering. He lives in luxury, wanting for nothing. But during the last 7 days of life, pain and mental torture attack the beings of Draminyen. Come, for they receive a sign that they are about to die. A voice comes and whispers to them, a terrible voice, saying how they will die and what monstrous suffering they will endure in the hells after death. In the last 7 days of life, all their riches and possessions decay, and they endure more suffering than we experience in a lifetime. Draminyen is known as the land of the fearful voice. Our own world in the south is called Zambu Ling. At first, our world was inhabited by gods from Rirang Lumpo. There was no pain or sickness, nor did the gods ever want for food. They lived in contentment, spending their days in deep meditation. There was no need for light on Zambu Ling then, for the gods emitted a pure light from their own bodies. One day, one of the gods noticed that on the surface of the earth there was a cream-like substance. Tasting it, he found it to be delightful to the palate and encouraged the other gods to taste it. All the gods so enjoyed eating the creamy food that they would eat nothing else, and the more they ate, the more their powers diminished. No longer were they able to sit in deep meditation. The light that once shone so brightly from their bodies began to fade, and finally was lost altogether. The world was clothed in darkness, and the mighty gods of Rirang Lumpo, human beings. Then, out of the darkness of night, there appeared in the heavens the sun. And when the sun faded, the moon and stars lit up the sky and illumined the world. The sun, moon, and stars appeared because of the past good deeds of the gods, and are a constant reminder to us that our world was once a peaceful, beautiful place, free from grasping, suffering, and pain. When the people of Zambu Ling had exhausted the supply of creamy food, they began to eat the fruit of the Nyungun plant. Each person had his own plant, which produced a corn-like fruit, and each day, as one fruit was eaten, another would appear, one a day, which was enough to satisfy the hunger of the beings of Zambu Ling. One morning, a man awoke to find that instead of producing only a single fruit, his plant had grown 2. Feeling greedy, he ate the 2 fruits, but the next day, his plant was empty. Needing to satisfy his hunger, the man stole someone else's plant, and so it went on and on, each person needing to steal from another in order to eat. With theft came greed, and each person, afraid of being left without, began to grow more and more Nyungut plants, having to work harder and harder to ensure that he would have enough to eat. Strange things began to happen in Zambu Ling. What used to be the peaceful abode of gods from Rirang Lumpo was now full of men who knew theft and greed. One day, a man felt that his genitals were causing him discomfort and tore them from his body, and so became a woman. This woman had contact with men and soon had children, who in turn had more children, and in a short time, Zambu Ling was filled with people, all of whom had to find food and places to live. The people of Zambuling did not live in peace together. There was much fighting and stealing. Indeed, the people of our world began to experience real suffering arising from the unsatisfactory state in which they found themselves. The people knew that in order to survive, they would have to become organized. They all gathered together and decided to elect a leader of the people, whom they call Mangke, meaning many people made him king. Mangke taught the people to live in relative harmony, each with his own land on which to build a home and grow food. This is how our world came to be, how from gods we became human beings, subject to disease, old age, and death. When we look into the night sky or bask in the warm brilliance of the sun, we should remember that, but for the good deeds of the gods from the precious mountain of Rirab Lumpo, we would be living in total darkness. But for the greed and desire of one person, our world would not know the suffering it experiences today. As long as any living being draws breath, wherever he shall be, there in compassion will the Buddha appear incarnate. Verse. You know, it's so interesting that the story of cosmology in the Tibetan tradition and the Garden of Eden and paradise and the original intention of our world was not meant to be suffering, and how much the stories, the creation stories, are so similar in different parts of the world, different cultures, different times. So perhaps there's a way to extricate the science from this to show the various ways that our world was created. So it's interesting. The next story, I think we have plenty of time. The next story is called Upame, Chenrezi, and Dolma. The celestial Buddha, Upame, Amitabha, looked down on the world from his pure land and saw the suffering of all beings. Upame felt great compassion for them. From this thought of compassion, Chenrezi Avalokiteshvara was born, the embodiment of compassion, the Lord of compassion. The mountains opened and water poured forth over the land and flowed into the Indian Ocean. Chenrezi appeared on an island in the middle of Lhasa, and seeing the suffering of all beings, vowed that he would help all beings to realize nirvana, the ultimate reality, peace. Chenrezi vowed that he would never withdraw from the world until all living beings, right down to the last blade of grass, attained to peace. In the lake there were many beings, and they all cried out for bodies. Chenrezi, hearing their cries, gave the beings the bodies that they asked for, but they were all the same, and so the beings all begged to be different from one another. Chenrezi then gave each of them a different body, each distinctive and unlike the other. Chenrezi, the Lord of Compassion, preached the Dharma, the teachings of the Buddha, that all beings in the lake, countless numbers of them, could attain nirvana. Many beings did attain the peace of nirvana, but every time Chenrezi returned to the lake, there were many more beings, far more than he had already helped. Again, Chenrezi preached the Dharma, and again many beings attained nirvana. When Chenrezi looked into the lake for the third time and saw so many beings needing help, he grew full of despair. Realizing what an impossible task that he had set for himself, he cried to the celestial Buddha, Upame, that he wanted to give back his noble vow, for the task was too great for him alone to fulfill. In his despair and compassion, Chenrezi's body shattered into innumerable pieces. Upame, seeing his plight, reformed his body, giving him even more power to help all living beings. Chenrezi now had 11 heads, surmounted by Upame's own head, and 1,000 arms, and an all-seeing eye in the palm of each hand. Still, Chenrezi saw his task was as impossible. Even with 1,000 arms and 11 heads, there were so many beings, and their minds were so clouded with impure thoughts. Chenrezi cried, and from a crystal teardrop on his cheek, Dolma Tara was born to help him. So there is not a being, no matter how insignificant, whose suffering is not seen by Chenrezi or by Dolma, and who cannot be touched by their compassion. The next short story is called Tree. At the time of the Buddha, Benares had been the holy city of India for many centuries, and Hinduism was its ancient religion. The city was famous for fine temples, many built in beautiful leafy parks with pools of clear, undisturbed waters, while the streets of Benares were full of jostling people going about their business, for trading had brought the city much wealth. Merchants had built themselves magnificent houses and had furnished them with goods they acquired on their commercial travels. In many ways, Benares was like any city of the world today, for then, as now, men sought happiness in making money and in a multitude of other good and evil ways, while some searched for happiness in religious creeds or philosophical paths. Leaders of many new teachings came to Benares, among them the Buddha. It happened that one day a wealthy merchant was checking the harness of his horse in a courtyard of one of the larger houses. While shouting men and women strapped packs onto the wooden saddles of braying mules, their constantly moving feet kicking up clouds of dust. A little dog barked excitedly, running through the legs of the mules, dodging angry nips from their teeth. In the midst of the preparation for the caravan, the merchant's neighbors drank his health and wished him well on his long journey, for it would take many months along the trade routes of Central Asia to China and Arabia. On his travels, he often met people who would ask to accompany him, for his caravan was well protected against attacks by brigands. The merchant had heard many stories from travelers he met on the way, stories of distant lands and strange customs. Some spoke of the mighty empire of Rome. Artists showed the merchant ways of writing, painting, and sculpting, unknown to his own people, and philosophers told him of the many ways in which men sought to know the meaning of life. So the merchant's caravan carried much more than wool, cotton, silks, jades, and brocades from country to country. It carried ideas. One of the merchant's neighbors filled a goblet with wine for him and asked, since he had no family, who would look after his fine house and warehouse while he was gone. The merchant indicated a middle-aged man who was checking the bales of wool. "Jigme will care for my household," he said. At first, the merchant's friends laughed, thinking he was joking. Then, realizing he was serious, they could not believe it. But Jigme is only a herdsman, one exclaimed. It is unwise to trust a poor man with wealth. Another insisted. The merchant shook his head. Jigme is my friend, he said. He is wise and has a kind heart. But the neighbors still thought the merchant was being very foolish. After all, they muttered among themselves, a Jigme was not one of them. He was of inferior rank, as some were jealous of Jigme and the trust the merchant placed in him. After arguing unsuccessfully with the merchant, one of the men said, the wise man that they call the Buddha is preaching nearby. Would you let us ask him for his advice? Remember, your warehouse has our goods in store as well as yours. Reluctantly, the merchant agreed. He went with his companions and found the Buddha seated in a palm grove, preaching to his followers. Welcoming the merchant and his companions, the Buddha asked them to sit with him while he listened to their story. When the Buddha heard how unwise the merchant's neighbors thought he was, he said he would tell them a story of ancient times, when King Brahmadatta was the king of Benares. The king's palace, the Buddha began, was in a beautiful park where the king spent many happy hours gardening, and he liked especially to tend his blossom tree. It was the jewel of the park, and he used to look after it very carefully. But neither the king nor those he took to see the blossom tree noticed the little clump of kusha grass growing at the roots of the tree trunk. But the spirit of the blossom tree knew all about the kusha grass and its spirit, for the two had been friends for longer than time. The blossom tree was mighty and strong, with thick roots that went deep, deep into the earth, reaching into the dark places of demons and monsters. Its trunk was strong, straight, and very high, so that people said its great canopy of branches and foliage reached the heavens. No one knew how old the blossom tree was, but it was ancient before Benares had become a great city, indeed, before Benares was even built, and no one knew how long ago that was. And so it was said that the blossom tree was as old as the world itself. Everyone saw the blossom tree differently. Some saw it as a mighty and mysterious tree, others as a magic tree, and some, like the king, enjoyed listening to the wind rustling in its leaves, which sounded like heavenly music. When he was in its shadow, the king was aware of the life of the blossom tree, and it reminded him that everything was like the tree, which grew in the spring and summer, thrusting out leaf-covered branches and new roots, and shriveling in the autumn and the winter, leafless, seemingly barren, yet its life went on, and the next year it would burst forth anew. So it told the story of life and death and life reborn. Legend told that the blossom tree, for some who could see, blossomed with the fruit of the secret of life. And sometimes the king had glimpsed it for a few seconds among its leaves, the most beautiful of blossoming flowers. When the king was having tea with the queen in his palace, he was surprised to see something floating in his cup. He looked up at the roof of the room and frowned. Small flakes of plaster were falling from the ceiling. He saw that the main wooden pillar which supported the ceiling had cracked and was moving. The queen cried out in fear and tried to pull her husband from the room, for she thought the whole ceiling was going to collapse. But the king asked his wife to leave while he stayed and inspected the damage. He saw that the pillar would have to be replaced as it was beyond repair, and it had to be done very quickly or it would soon split from top to bottom. He ordered his servants to search the palace grounds for a suitable tree from which the new pillar could be made. All that day the servants searched the park and very carefully measured trees to find a suitable one for the new pillar. After inspecting all the trees in the park, the king's servants realized that there was only one tree that could be used. Sadly, they returned to the palace and told the king that his beloved blossom tree was the only one fine enough and strong enough to replace the old pillar. The king was shocked. There must be another, he insisted. Maybe not one as strong as the blossom tree, but strong enough to replace the old pillar. Your Majesty, the servant said sorrowfully, in stature and strength, the blossom tree is the only one suitable to make the new pillar. The king was very unhappy and undecided as to what he should do. If the old pillar split, his whole palace would fall, and his family and many others would be without a home. But there was no other tree in his park as beautiful as the blossom tree. With the queen and their servants, the king went to see the blossom tree. Although it was early evening and the sun still shone, the evening star was so bright that they could see it quite clearly as they walked through the park. The king inspected the blossom tree and other trees, and he could even see that in comparison, it was indeed the best from which to make the pillar. Perhaps, he thought, I'm being very selfish in trying to keep this beautiful tree in which I love, when it could save the home of many. After all, he thought very sadly, it is only a tree, even if it is a special one. So the king gave the order to his servants, and they prepared sacrifices of penance to the blossom tree's spirit. It was night when the king and queen burned incense and offered sweet-tasting delicacies at the foot of the tree. The queen was weeping loudly as the smoke from the incense fires rose into the velvety blackness. The blossom tree's spirit did not know what to do to save its home, and the gentle breeze quickly carried news of the plight of the blossom tree's spirit to all the other tree spirits. They gathered around the blossom tree spirit, trying to comfort her and to think of some way of saving her home. Everyone made suggestions, but none was really likely to save the blossom tree. All night long, after the king had left, the tree spirits argued as to what should be done to save the blossom tree, until the poor blossom tree spirit was crying in despair. Then she heard the kusha grass spirit say in a soft voice, "Do not worry, my friend, for I have an idea that will save your home." At daybreak, the king's woodsmen walked through the park, carrying 2 great axes. They were not singing as they usually did, and the woodsmen noticed that the birds were not singing either. The whole park seemed to be waiting in silence, expectantly. The sun remained hidden behind the clouds, shedding only a gray light, and there was no pleasant breeze as they began to inspect the blossom tree to find the best place to start chopping. They were surprised to see that the bark of the tree looked quite different from the day before. Carefully, the head woodsman went round the tree, studying more closely. When he touched the bark, it felt soft. "This tree has gone rotten here," he said to his companions. He tested another part of the tree, and that too had gone soft. They peered up at the branches of the blossom tree. All its leaves hung limply, as if they were sick and wilting. "We cannot use this tree to make the pillar," they said. "The wood's too soft." "I don't understand," one of the woodsmen said blankly. "It looked so healthy last night. It was the finest tree in the park." "I do not think," the woodsman said thoughtfully, "that we were meant to cut the blossom tree down." As they walked through the park to tell the king that they had no choice, that they would have to make the pillar from one of the other trees, though not such a fine one. The sun shone through the clouds, and the birds began singing, and the little creatures of the park bustled about their business. All were happy that the blossom tree was safe, and happiest of all was the blossom tree spirit. All the tree spirits of the park watched the kusha grass spirit with delighted laughter, for before the woodsman came, it had changed into a large chameleon. It had given the secret of how chameleons could change their color to the blossom tree, so it was able to change the color of its bark to look rotten when the woodsman came. "But how?" the tree spirits wanted to know. "Were you able to make your trunk seem soft when the woodsman touched you?" The blossom tree laughed as the kusha grass spirit, in chameleon form, moved over the tree trunk quicker than the eye could see. Thus the woodsman thought that the soft body of the chameleon was the bark of the tree. The blossom tree sang the praises of the kusha grass spirit. "Spirits of the trees, for all our mighty power, we knew not what to do, while the humble kusha grass spirit had wit to save my home for me. Truly, we should choose our friends without considering whether they are our superior, equals, or inferiors, making no distinctions. Whether they be tree, bird, or grass, each according to its strength can help a friend in his hour of need." And so she instructed all the tree spirits and the assembled devas, saying, Wherefore such as we would escape from an evil plight must not merely consider whether a man is equal or superior, but must make friends of the wise, whatsoever their station in life." As he finished his story, the Buddha smiled at the merchant, who was laughing, for his neighbors who had thought him so foolish had received their answer. The Buddha ended by saying, "In an earlier life, Ananda, my chief disciple, was then the tree spirit, and I, the spirit of the kusha grass." So tomorrow we'll continue this wonderful book. We have many great short stories. That story. Please, everyone, take care. Would you recite with me a few Om Mani Padme Hum of Chenrezig, since we were talking about him? Let's recite together just maybe a number of Chenrezig. His mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum. Let's do it together. Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum. 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 Thank you. We're here in the temple again, and the Buddha is directly behind me. He never told me the story of the blossom tree, so now I have his secret too. Good night. See you tomorrow. Many blessings.